Hey, I, hey, I, hey, I, DIY, hey, I, DIY, hey, I, DIY, hey, I, DIY, hey.
Welcome to this latest episode of AI DIY. Today we are discussing the Denver AI Summit. All of us on the call today, we have Ryan. We'll do intros in a second. I think that we're just going to start with the Denver AI Summit. The Denver AI Summit was an event that occurred last week here in Denver, and for a whole day, the city was dressed to the nines about AI.
Right, plenty of blue suits to be found.
Yeah, the event was put on by the city of Denver, very much promoting Colorado's overall aim of becoming the number one state for VC funding into AI in America. We were currently number 7, a fact that was consistently reminded by many speakers. It featured tech legends such as Reid Hoffman and the original CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, not the original CEO, the CEO when they became really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an awesome conference. I think that I have a lot of thoughts. I want to kind of pass it to the team to kind of discuss like what the major trends we saw, kind of what people are talking about, kind of talk about the feasibility of about Colorado becoming the number one state for VC funding. Is that something that we actually saw or something that we think we're headed towards? So with that being said, I think I'll kick to Eli. Eli, what was your overall thoughts on the conference so far?
I mean, the thing that stood out to me the most was like the repeated mention by Mayor Johnson around like the city being an open API for technology startups to like plug into civic issues. And I think at face value, it's an amazing mandate. You know, the city is meant to be an open forum. I can remember working at the city of Austin 4 or 5 years ago and being able to take public calls. You know, anybody could call the public works department and, you know, your boy answers sometimes, right? And so like, that's awesome. Like that's what a city government should be. But I think the sort of like superlative nature of like this open API for, you know, the city is exciting, but you're kind of met with this like elitist crowd, you know, Reid Hoffman flying in, stopping in and gracing us with his presence before he went to Aspen.
And he was definitely talking about that in his, because we came in seeing him talk first, and he was like, I thought he was extremely optimistic, and he had some great analogies. Like, what do you guys think about his whole speech?
Yeah, it was definitely great, right? Like it's exciting to see these heavy hitters like coming to Denver in general. Right. And Mike Johnston sitting down with him, Eric Schmidt, like super cool experience. But I think the most value is always meeting people in the crowd, hearing about what people are doing with AI. So that was my like big takeaway was like, there's a lot of activity.
Because there was a little bit of value sprinkled in there with like the Boltwise coming and doing their pitch and like AI bolt finding. I thought that was pretty cool. That was one of the ones that I wish I would have thought of because it was just so simple. All these industrial bolts, there's thousands of different models, and AI can be really good at like parsing through and figuring out the one you need for your manufacturing.
Shout out Boltwise,
we should
sponsor. Yeah.
The big thing that stood out to me too was like the just like the overall civic nature of it, like the fact that the city put it on. I think that with AI being where it is, like if you think about this compared to like cloud 10, 15 years ago, like the city would be putting on a conference a couple of years into the heyday of that technology. And I thought it was cool too, like there's the immediate impact that a lot of things were having in AI. Like even the startups that they showed were not like pie in the sky, like here's a fun character from the movie Her or anything like that. It was like, here's how we help current legislation get written. Here's how we help paperwork get done in the
city services
process.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool. And this is something that I know Reid Hoffman hit on a lot, is like AI's ability to just really enhance government's efficiency overall, and also like everyday citizens' abilities to connect to the government as well. And that's something that made me really optimistic, and really just seeing all those people there. I don't want to call them suits because I wouldn't say they're the traditional suits that you would see at a conference like this. It was a lot of people who control very real power and essential services in the city coming out and seeing how they could apply this new technology to do that job better, which I think is not something that you'd see in most cities, in my mind.
Yeah, and then I think building on that, then I'm curious to hear Ryan's take on it as well. But, you know, we had a stakeholder for one of our projects who attended the San Francisco Summit that was much more engineering focused, much more on the sort of like frontier teams like Anthropic, you know, OpenAI presented, as well as like Neo4j and some other, you know, key libraries and utilities. And he reported back to us that he was shocked that education wasn't present there. is maybe mentioned once or twice, where here there was a whole panel on education. Reid Hoffman spoke to education.
Yeah.
Schmidt spoke to education. And I do appreciate that, like, that topic came up so much because, like, it's definitely a use case I know I am very passionate about. You all are.
Yeah.
And so that is exciting to see, like, how are we going to prepare future generations to use these things, and this whole like literacy versus fluency. I mean, I think that was super encouraging.
And I will say too that it's like it was the first AI conference or grouping of AI people I was at where no one talked about AGI killing us all.
Yeah, and Reid
like much
Hoffman,
more practical. Which I thought was awesome.
I wasn't expecting somebody like
Eric
Reid.
Schmidt did a little bit.
Yeah,
Dude,
they were like all about accessibility though, and like from as high a place as they are, that was pretty cool to hear. But as a segue, like in the middle, we kind of ran into Ryan. And so do you guys want to give him a little bit of intro and FaceTime?
Definitely, Ryan. What did you think about the conference?
Well, to be clear, there were two conferences happening simultaneously. One was Denver Startup Week and one was Denver AI. And I tried my hardest to kind of avoid both. But
We saw a guy from InfoWars. Were you at the InfoWars conference?
Yeah, so 3 conferences.
I was absolutely not. But no, so I ended up going down one day for the Denver Startup Week, and then happened to run over some people who were saying, "Oh, we're going to go see Eric Schmidt speak." So and that all kind of fortuitously happened on Thursday. So I was able to have like mostly a normal week with like one day in Denver where I got to like run into some people, wave hi, run into you guys. But nonetheless, like I'm pretty in the loop on a lot of the sort of meetups and stuff. Like I was on the organizing committee for Boulder Startup Week too. So like I've heard a lot of the talking points before. So that's, and also my wife's in education. So she's a school psychologist. So I have like opinions on that side of things as well. So to steer it clear. But when you're referencing the specific salient points of the talks, other than Eric Schmidt's, I cannot speak to them. And him talking about, mounting guns on drones, and do we want that? Do we want to have drone on drone warfare that just fills up the landfill? And so there's some interesting points just from him alone, and showing his
forgot he talked about drones hitting each other.
Nuclear power company.
Doing it.
Yeah. But the broader sense, so I think like tonally, what might be interesting is like, because you guys mentioned suits a couple times, it's like who's in the room is maybe an interesting like place to talk about this from, because this is something that we put on a hackathon in the spring, and you guys were a part of that. And the difference between, especially when you talk about government, like, anytime you're dealing with open data, the people who can give you access versus the people who are actually going to build with that are almost always different people.
Eli, that it was a lot of vendors, and I think we were expecting it to be startups more than it was.
Yeah. And
right,
so
you see the lonely snowflake table in the corner, right? With their latest issues. But I think to Ryan's point, like, who's in the room? Even the folks that we came across were deans of academics at community colleges, entrepreneurs running, home, like smart home automation platforms. Getting to chat with like Caruso from Caruso Ventures and his new podcast. There was a lot of like, I would say like practitioners there, but then you could definitely pretty clearly see the cloud vendors, the security vendors, people who are making plays into the civic tech space at that, municipal enterprise like level. I mean, that was definitely very obvious, along with there was some capital in the room, some VCs as well. So, man, pretty healthy sort of diversity that, we tend to try to stay out of things like Startup Week generally because that's not where our customers are. Like, frankly, like we're too expensive, to go try to sell to startups. Even Series, C, we're not really trying to get involved in that space. That's why we prioritize the summit.
Yeah, and like you guys might be better at selling than me as a result of that, right? Because I think, especially when, but Startup Week might have a different advantage in that it's more approachable for a teacher to go to and to learn. And because I think when you go to some of these these larger conferences, it's like the temptation is to say like, fait accompli. I certainly heard that in Eric Schmidt's talk, is like, this is the, like, it's very prescriptive. He's like, it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, but we're going to get here. And I don't know if you guys heard that in Reid Hoffman's talk as well, is like, it seems like the path has already been laid out and described, and now you just have to walk on it, which I was thinking about this before we hopped on the call, is like, almost always, I feel like when everyone's like at that moment of consensus is when the new thing comes up and just throws everybody's assumptions out the window.
Yeah.
Right when consensus emerges is when it gets destroyed once again. And to me, that's kind of how I feel like has been brewing for the last, like, I don't know, 6-7 months maybe.
I totally feel the same way, because I was gonna say that, like, very much feels like by the shape of that conference, at least, like based on the conversations that I had and the things I saw, that like a lot of people just assume this is gonna be just like another like enterprise cloud play, like it's gonna play out the same as like the big data revolution or all these different things, or at least it's gonna have the same mechanisms of distribution into these companies. And I think a lot of people think that, but I know that, like, Ryan, we've talked a lot about like how AI like changes like the fundamental workflows of what we're doing in a way that I think so much like is going to change. Like, I don't think it's going to go that way. Like, a single AI system is only as valuable as like the data it has access to.
Yeah.
And like, it is like on the scale of needing access to everything in an organization. So it has to go through IT vendors naturally. But I think that it's not even really determined how they're going to run all these systems. Like, the GPUs have just been ordered for the most part. So as this scale comes up, I think so much is going to change about how it's actually distributed to like every individual worker.
Well, I mean, I don't know. So I graduated college in 2014. And in 2014, I would say that there was a bit of a wave around IoT, and 2012, 2013, 2014, and also around like smart cities as well. So like, and that was kind of the layer of that was the form that like GovTech was taking at that, and municipal data was taking at that time. And you had like interesting things coming off the heels of like New York City had just opened up their platform. Obama was bringing that up to the federal level. So you had, that was like kind of, but a lot of that stuff, it's taken the better part of a decade for those ideas to really like become best practices, but they still haven't reached, I think, the same level of scale that you might have expected to. Like, I think, Gavin Newsom wrote that book Citizenville back in that era, and a lot of the ideas in that book are pretty much still dormant, more or less, right? Around like, grid improvements and so forth. And I don't think people anticipated, the political landscape and how much like it would happen in the second half of the 20s, let alone COVID and so forth. But to me,
but it's also like a significant infrastructure investment for a lot of those like things, right?
Yeah.
Or for like specifically like IoT, the IoT trend at the time, like, and then as it goes out, like there is a specific like this infrastructure need, right? And I think that does exist for GPUs, but at the same time, like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit with like just building a computer that can pass the Turing test in and of itself, right? That can be picked up in a lot of these things. So I feel like if it can be introduced at like the software level, where like people don't have to buy a bunch of GPUs, if they can actually make that to where that is like how it's released to people, which I know is what like OpenAI's API does, right? Like the idea there is you don't have to have your own GPU. If they can actually keep up with that demand and keep it as like a software service, if that's actually like scalable to an enterprise, I think that's what makes it a little bit like more possible to implement, right? Like I feel like it's, you go.
No, I there might be a way to tie all these things. So we have on the table right now, we have like IoT, we have AI, IoT/GovTech, I think we're kind of lumping together right now. And then we have education. And I think in IoT, one of the, like, what you're mentioning is kind of this, like, leads me to think about, if you produce some piece of information, like what's your cost that you incurred to get the hardware out to produce that significant insight, right? And how many useful metrics came off of that one device that you shipped. And that's really, so like if you're trying to get really good density of information amongst a city, well then like you have to have a lot of sensors, but the problem is most of that's just going to be noise, right? And so you're not real, like if a tree falls in the woods, frankly, nobody cares, right? And I don't think that that's really been like right time placement, and smartphones haven't really established this, but there's no real broad a lot of good broadcast layers, and people have tried to do this with various sort of like check-in technologies and so forth that allow for like a little bit more of those fabric layers, more crowdsourcing and so forth, but you haven't really seen protocol innovations there. And if you take that and apply it to AI, if you're mapping out a space, you're going to produce a lot more answers than people have questions. Is another, and is that good use of GPU? Is that good use of the hardware that you're having to spend? Is I don't know. I think that's a reasonable question. So like, are you like,
Yeah, I mean, I have like
are you throwing an overpowered solution at, running a
and
sixth grader's mile?
But I feel like that's the trade-off that they got wrong, that like a lot of the smart city stuff got wrong, is like assuming that they'd be able to have these capital expenditures like over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like the issue, like the big win with AI is that if you think of it as like, I don't want to say replacing humans, but I'm going to say like replacing human brain power. Like specifically, like let's use like one of the startups that presented there that essentially like made a very specific like contracting problem inside of a city government. That's like the easiest way to explain it. That was basically systemic, but was like known by just a few people. They made that knowledge like much more accessible so that a person could actually like fill this out in like an eighth of the time. Which is ridiculous.
The problem with that though is that like there's no change management in place for the city to adopt those new review processes, and there's a lot of institutional job security that's like embedded in cyclical reviews, controlled processes, federated ownership across departments. Like, and I think what's an important point to make, and that's kind of like at odds with the AI revolution, if you want to call it that, and this came up a lot for me in the talks, is that like the notion of streamlining, efficiency, sort of like deconstructing and reconstructing problems or solutions in better ways, there's a whole lot of marginalized populations that have been left out of things when that has happened historically. And so in the city or like the civic tech space, and this is coming from my time like at Austin, right? And we had like public, participatory sessions where people said they don't want it streamlined. It's not about streamlining. It's not about efficiency or things going faster. It's about visibility. It's about being included, being heard, being involved. And so just because AI can answer some questions faster or, potentially get you through the review more accurately, there's still going to be a ton of issues with the way decisions get made, how the public gets included. I think that problem is only going to get worse, like in the short term, because of obfuscated processes just kind of being packaged up and said, like, here's your city assistant that's going to help you connect to city services, but you really don't even know how or what it's doing. It's going to be a huge issue with like 5 out of 10 of those demos that we saw.
Yeah,
like it's going to be a big issue.
Yeah, because I think that like, that was the thing Reid Hoffman brought up, is like, I think it's going to allow people to be connected to the government than ever before. But I think that like a huge thing that I've thought in the past, like efficiency is the problem with like a lot of like specifically local government services, like to be very specific. But I think that a lot of times like those processes are like put in place over time through like various means of like patchwork legislation, because that's how the system works. That a lot of times like speeding that up could actually seriously affect a ton of different things, to where like the time and the cadence that it's on is often how it's built. And I feel like that requires like a level of like change management is the right word, right? Like figuring out how that actually works. But even that pales in comparison to like the Smart Cities initiative, where you had to put out a bunch of sensors to even begin to have these discussions of what's happening, right? Like a lot of times you could start with like looking at the processes you have in place now. And I think that it puts us in a place to where we can actually rebuild a lot of processes, I think, to like include marginalized communities and not have this type of stuff that built up over time in terrible ways. But all of that like is like feels very pie in the sky and very like requires a lot of structural change to actually happen.
And then that's
exciting to see us lead on, but I don't know how it's going to actually work.
Yeah, I don't know how it plays out.
Another thing that Reid Hoffman brought up that was really interesting to me was like more on a human level of our intelligence used to be our memory capabilities and capacities. And he said with LLMs now, they can remember so much for us in the context that kind of places memory in the scope of, he said also that it was interesting that human intelligence kind of adapts as we need to like evolve our intelligence capabilities to suit the current day and age that we're the challenges we face. And so like it kind of overlapped with what Eric Schmidt was saying, was that just to nerd out on LLMs, I feel like Ryan has thoughts on like his absolute confidence that context is no longer going to be an issue anymore. Like they're going to have just unlimited context soon. And I know Keith was telling me things while he was saying that. So what did you think about that, Ryan?
Well, I don't know that I think context is unlimited. That was the implication there. I will say on the Reid Hoffman specifically is like probably my best proxy for understanding Reid Hoffman is like through the fact that I interacted with Pi a lot, right? And I think that Pi was being built kind of simultaneously, as I understand it, to a lot of what, like GPT-4 and so forth. And so as meant to be somewhat of a different take in terms of how it processed context and just the type of interaction that could lead to. And one of the things that I still find myself going back to Pi, because I like that, this is something we talked about, is like it can pick up on the beat of a conversation better than ChatGPT can oftentimes. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just because that's how it's trained to be more empathetic or what have you. But I think when you think about like, these regulatory landscapes, like they're often defining what you can't do, right? It's about qualification for services or for this, that, and the other thing. It's a permissioning scheme largely. And that's, how fast you can drive on the road, how fast you can't drive. And in, the private sector, we're kind of used to people telling us like, okay, you can't do these things. And that's basically the way regulation works. But if you think about it in education, it's like you're granted into specific services. Like, I was in a gifted and talented program when I was a kid. I'd qualify for that. And that's like an explicit grant of new features of this, like, so the regulation sort of graduates you into the next area of the product. And when I think about like how that kind of translates onto what we're doing with like tool calls and AI and these various things, the assistant that you guys are talking about, like the city manager assistant, I think is really, it's a bit too explicit to think about it as like just read all the rules and tell me what the rules are and repeat them back to me as a glossary. I kind of want something that tells me the shortcuts more than anything else, because like that's what time and spent, knowing them, that's what it really is about. Like, oh, if you hang out at this coffee shop, you're likely to run into the mayor, get your question answered, get picked on at the city council meeting, what have you. Like, there's a big, like, for every stack of paper somewhere, there's the shadow process that's actually how to do it quick. And I think that's more of what I want that city manager to do for me as I navigate. I want it to help me hack that system, and I want it to help everybody hack that system so that you speed up. And I think Eric Schmidt talked about this, and I think people might be, just a little tongue in cheek of saying like, get out of the way, support entrepreneurs, have programs. But I think what it maybe misses a little bit is, rather than explicitly granting and saying like, because of X, Y, and Z, you qualify for this service, making them open access. And that's kind of the policy behind a lot of these data, these open data platforms, is saying like, innovate as hard and as fast as you want on top of the same data. And, that sort of lets the, you hope that lets the most innovative solutions come to the fore. I mean, there's problems with people, certainly manipulating that to their advantage and throwing more compute than they reasonably should have access to or what have you. But like, that's another batch of problems.
Yeah.
It's a batch of problems.
And also, I'm new to Denver, but this mayor is like all over the place. So that's cool. He was at the AI summit. He's really leaning into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm involved with the Colorado People's Alliance, and they're heavily engaged, which you guys should come to the vote mob happening in Aurora in a few weeks. I'm really excited. There's going to be 1,000 people. They're going to vote together on October 26th. It's going to be super cool. You don't have to vote to attend. The profile on Mayor Johnston is like pretty clear, right? He wants to be perceived. He desperately wants to be perceived as a social impact mayor. He wants to be known for addressing homelessness, getting people off the streets with his House 1000 plan. He wants to be seen as a transparent open, mayor with his like, there's an open dashboard on like that process, as open as, you might be able to trust, right? And so I think, Mayor Johnston putting the pedal to the metal, getting the Den AI Summit together, getting some heavy hitters in the room, getting over 1,000 people there to talk about AI.
Yeah.
It is awesome to see that they threw it together in 60-something days, too.
Well,
it wasn't like there wasn't a whole. It's
crazy to me that the governor spoke as well. And
Oh yeah, the governor.
like, not to get way too political, but like seeing a local government like do a conference with the state government is not a thing you see in Texas often. Like there's not alignment between those often in something like this. So it was very like it was cool to see like from the governor on down there being like a comprehensive strategy about what Colorado is trying to do in a way that I simply hadn't seen before from like a state government.
No,
yeah. It would be cool if they hadn't passed that AI bill though, because like I know Reid Hoffman on the stage to the mayor's face was like, maybe if you guys weren't passing bills like that last one. I was like, damn, he just said it.
Yeah. He said the quiet thing out loud, Reid.
So I guess a good tangent to that is like there out of the heavy hitters you spoke to, there was even a cybersecurity CEO there, and data privacy was on like most of these guys' mind, and it's also on Eli's mind a lot. So I think you want to speak to that a little bit.
I mean, I was surprised at how prevalent it was in all of the talks, panels. I mean, everything from workforce education to the discussions around the startup showcases. I mean, to Reid, Eric, the keynotes, like everybody touched on data privacy, security. And, like from my perspective, I think there's really cool people like Liminal doing amazing things with these wrappers around, IT environments where you can sort of track those kind of usage or when something does like leave your environment and even block it or redirect it. And, like Liminal is doing cool shit on that front. But the more and more I like continue to just like investigate these kind of standards and where that conversation's going. Yeah, I kind of wish Uche and Osi were here because like I am much more keen on the future of like local temporal models rather than cloud services. Like my hypothesis is that even in the next decade, 2 decades, we will have enough compute in our pockets to have these things on board. We're not even going to have to send data anywhere.
That's where like I think Eric Schmidt was at, because I know I heard him say that like there's not going to be a need for context or token limits anymore, and then he like wouldn't explain like anything behind that. But Keith was like, "Nah, that's not gonna happen."
I doubt he was like being a fan of local models that are coming from Google.
Yeah.
Like I feel like like Google, like I think it's gonna run on the cloud, but the idea that like you could have like your own virtual private network where it doesn't ever have to leave your VPC is like huge. That's something
it's the only way
quasi provided by the Azure service already that a lot of people are doing. That I'm pretty sure a lot of OpenAI's consumption is through.
I mean,
I could rant about the enterprise software space for far too long beyond the podcast.
I don't know that like clients side like local models is fundamentally opposed to Google in the long run. I don't think it's that cut and dry, because like running hardware is expensive at scale, right? And if people are buying compute every year, 2 years, or 3 years on their phone upgrade cycle, then there's margin in there, right? If you can get an architecture across your server and all of these clients, and you can push that work out, do you actually need the server running all the time? Or more specifically, like if I'm the internet's just a proxy for what people think, right? So if you have no, but at some
right.
at some level, like
you
that's an implementation of it.
Yes.
So I mean, it has other obviously it has a ton of other purposes for machine to machine communication and so forth. But like that is one big use of it that I think most consumers would identify with. And so if you don't need to centrally host that, and you say, oh, and I trust Google with being the arbiter who gets to know which parts about me, because I already have a long-standing, like I might not trust Google, not to use it to sell me ads, but I probably trust that Google won't let other people get into my pocket. Like it's the devil argument is fundamentally what it is about, is they can analyze my data a ton privately, put the way that they do that up in open source so that Apple cannot. It's like, it's that job runs one time, and that's sort of your platform decision of who do I want to give all of my private thoughts and data to?
Yeah.
Do I want to be, cabin in the woodsing it and run a tiny box and like do that for all my friends and have a private? Some people are going to make that choice, and they're probably then going to make some really cool startups and some different ideas off that. I don't think that that's going to be. I think we're under indexing how big of a market that actually could be.
Right. I think, like, let's bring it to life in like a real example. Like when you sit down in your doctor's office. The last time I went to the doctor, I had to sign a waiver that said they're going to use AI to process our conversation to create notes so that the doctor can actually engage in our discussion. They, dropped a device on, in the doctor's office. We talked, and the doctor was like, yeah, this saves me hours a day and notes and paperwork. Like, it's been amazing. And like the immediate thought I had was, there's almost no instance where this needs to go into the cloud at all. Like even today with a simple piece of hardware, a phone and a local model, there's not even any need to risk it going into the cloud, being intercepted, anything, prompts being injected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you can cut off all of those vulnerabilities, even in just one like healthcare use case, I don't know how like folks like Apple would make money on that per se, but like I'm more and more keen on local on-device processing because you immediately satisfy HIPAA worries. You immediately satisfy FERPA worries, PCI compliance, handling any kind of PII. There's so many like sort of like the panacea that local models offer to me is almost like it's deafening right now. Like I'm just hearing it everywhere. And I think that there's a whole cohort of people on Discord and 4chan or whatever else it is now, 8chan, who are actively trying to jailbreak like OpenAI's models and just make them open source and run locally. And the moment the community manages to do that, I think it's kind of to Ryan's point about like, okay, we've reached consensus. We're all assuming we have to use these huge providers and pay the de facto tax to them. But if people jailbreak these models and make them available, I mean, it could fundamentally change the way we think about what we build. Like if local processing becomes that available, that's what has me excited on that front.
And then similarly, I was kind of surprised when we heard those like big hitters in the healthcare, and then there was a company that was helping like with grocery bills, and so it's very like human touching, like organizations, and they all had kind of the opinions that, well, if our users don't know that they're using AI behind the scenes in the app, that's okay with us. And that kind of struck me as like, well, I don't know what to think about that yet.
I mean, I philosophically disagree with that.
Yeah, I kind of
disagree
with
how,
it.
Like, I focus on transparency and explainability, as I think it's the most important thing, like that we have a responsibility to do.
Yeah,
I disagree.
Yeah.
But Ryan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think like something that sticks out to me is like, so a metaphor of like is, you see what Apple's doing with their camera system, right? Is like every year they just make a better camera that's just better at capturing information out there. I think there's a lot of critiques that the camera that Apple ships is truer to reality, but not as true to your eye. But that's like a very clearly an intentional choice so that more layers of value can be created on top of that, because their just goal is to capture as much information as possible. And so they're long and straight there in terms of like, how do we make this thing better is how much reality did we capture, but with a bigger sensor, with more lenses, and then they add in like, okay, you can, just hit the little slider there now this year and you can you can switch between those styles. You want to save a style? Cool. Not a problem. But you're still capturing the same, like the base realities under the hood. And Instagram.
I like the concept of that reality capture, though, right? Like that's really that's what I think the on-device computes are going to do, and that's what you see with like the Microsoft one that did the screenshots, right? Like it's just capturing.
Right. But what I think that people, as web developers, candidly, we kind of forget is we spent the last, our careers talking about the stack for a really long time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the stack became a circle and no one really started talking about it in a material way. Right? No, but this is like kind of true. And because like you take something like tree shaking. I mean, I've heard tree shaking more in the last, year or two in terms of practical applications for making my code run faster by giving some context back to the AI to figure out which components I should get rid of, how to make my code better, and so forth. At compile time, at runtime, whatever it is. I mean, look at Mojo and Modular. Like these guys are doing crazy stuff with trying to bring in AI into the instruction set, right? To close and so that takes high level, what is the code path that's being run, and then figure out, okay, which compiler do we need, right?
I remember tree shaking was huge for a little bit when Snowpack came out to try to replace Webpack. They were trying to, that was their main feature. Kind of like, so reaching the end of the conference, there was a really cool segment at the end on like education, which is what we're close to. They all had kind of similar things to say. There were some actual locals there that teach and educate. And so what did you guys think about that? And the Magic School, the cool app that was helping kids learn and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca from Colorado AI Initiative, Antonio from Aurora Public Schools, and Adil from Magic School, along with the CEO of, is it Guide? I believe they're like a workplace education tool as well. I'm forgetting her name, but it was a fabulous panel. And like, at that point, there was probably like 50 people left out of the 1,000. End of the day, no more keynotes, but there's a lot of like really dynamite insight on like how AI is going to show up in education. And for me, the biggest takeaway and kind of reinforcement of like NIST's, like National Institute on Standards and Technologies, like AI frameworks, is just the prevalence of code design. Getting people involved in the development of your work and using that like latent knowledge from subject matter experts to inform AI to be more effective. Like there's almost no way to build one of these systems if you don't have access to stakeholders that know question answer pairs or know sensibility of a conversation, understand how they navigate discussions. And it's not just relevant for chat, but it's just relevant for anything you're using an LLM to contextualize. And so they were all using, teacher advisory boards, student advisory boards, leadership councils. They're running a student-led AI symposium in 2 months that we absolutely should go to, that
for sure
will be 100% facilitated by students. Flipping the system on its head is the most exciting thing that I took away from it.
So if I could push back on you a little, Eli, because I think you said two things that are kind of contradictory there. You said it's like, it's impossible to build one of these systems without the sort of stakeholder aspect of this, but also flipping the system on its head. And you said those as kind of two, like, so one is sort of best practices, tribal wisdom, and the other is like, throw it out, rebuild it from scratch. And I'm curious, like, which one of those camps are you actually in? Because I think there is a real, I do think that they are opposite fundamentally. If you like,
it's a both situation, because if we can get to students who can code design the tools and the systems that they want to be a part of, I think it's a better world. And so it's a both and to me, where, by letting, the closer we can get to students, for example, if we were building an education product, is ultimately better, because historically the stakeholder management game stops at the teacher.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get parents and students involved. And I think that the absence of parents in our education system was shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single person talking about AI education products mentioned parents. What?
I don't even think that
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So I think it's a both and, Ryan, honestly.
Ryan, I think like to kind of hit though on what I think you're saying is like very much like in education, it's like the top-down approach of like basically building what the district admins say versus the bottom-up approach of building what is great for students. Like that's counterintuitive in different markets, but in like education in particular, like the stewards or like the districts or the people that run the districts and the schools, etc. like they are like they view themselves very much as like stewards of student data, right? So if you have to build something in collaboration with them, that then you facilitate collaboration with the students to figure out what you need. And so I feel like that's very different than a lot of models where like building what the bosses want versus building what the workers want are very different in a lot of different markets. But with education, I feel like you have to take that unified approach to even have a chance of like being in the actual market with students.
But I would maybe switch it a little bit to say like maybe the exception here defines the rule, which is like we're focused on one modality here, which is like, you know, the traditional education path that, you know, 90 something % of kids fall on. But what if you're homeschooled? Like, what does the regulation dictate to you is like, what is the good enough and you're meeting the criteria and so forth? I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I live up north, there's a pretty solid contingent of, you know, homeschooling families in my neck of the woods, and they slap together their own systems and you know, have co-ops and moms that, you know, will take whole pods of kids for a day and so forth. I mean, I'm not well versed in it, but I have friends who have been, and I think that the rule there is for the broader education system is like, if you strip out all of the checkpoints along the way, where do we judge at the outcome level the kid who went through the traditional path, the 90% path against the homeschool kid? Like, that's actually the whole, what is the true, you know, IO of the whole system of like, do you understand what I'm saying? Which is like, everything in the middle is just sort of a how. It's not really an outcome. And then you can, and if you judge against that, then you get to some more uncomfortable questions like, how much value is there in this particular administrative role? How much value, like, can these be done by external services and so forth? I don't know. That's to me, from an engineering perspective, that to me is like, is there another path around a ton of red tape and sort of things we inherited from antiquity?
Right. That's a whole other.
Yeah.
This is kind of going a different direction, but like a huge thing that me, like speaking of engineering things, was that okay, I'm actually going to make this a call to action. This is actually something that like truly inspired me. Was that like one of the biggest things of that education session was that pretty much every panelist mentioned like the ability of the models to translate and help them with like students who do multilingual.
Oh yeah, they did mention that. Yeah,
every single person multiple times mentioned that as like the coolest feature, that they were able to talk to parents. Like one person had me almost in tears with the story. Like, it was crazy. And I think that from an engineering perspective, I know that is in no way what they intended to build out the gate with ChatGPT or with these models. And like, I think it's potentially the greatest second order effect in all of technology history, of just like we accidentally made a master translator.
Right. We trained it on 30 languages.
With random, it's like trained on so many languages. They were saying like it did some obscure language or less or obscure for the US.
Well, with COPA, we tested it on, like West African languages that we know it wasn't trained on, and it was translating within some semblance of accuracy.
Yeah, and that's not 100% success rate for sure, but the fact that it's high enough that two people that previously could not communicate could communicate is like a value that people are finding in these systems, when I know that's not what they're not using them as translation systems. It's just a benefit they're discovering. And that's like
it's the master metaphor technology. I think that's totally true. Yeah, I mean, we talked about that recently.
And so speaking of homeschooling and like the importance of that, and parents do play a huge role in that. And then I don't think that CEO of like all the districts even mentioned parents once. So it's a good call out to mention like parents weren't really in that discussion much. And then like kind of because my own personal politics are like that parents should be let into the schools more. So like that's a good thing to see that there's kind of a gap in how AI is even looking at it.
Well, right. You got one kid whose parents are like, no, like, fuck that. Don't use AI. That's, then you have another set, maybe a more affluent or student that has more access through parents that are very supportive of it and sending them to after school programs and training them on AI. And so like, personally, I think the digital divide is worse today than ever. I don't think we're on a path to it getting better, but I do think parents are a really interesting missing link in that. But maybe we can go around and share any other kind of like big takeaways or call to actions, and then we need to wrap up because we're at time. So I just wanted to see if there's anything that you want to share, just kind of to conclude our discussion for the viewers to like take away.
Yeah, I mean, just the thing that stands out to me about the end of the AI summit was how cool it was to see like actual educators being brought onto the panel to discuss like how the AI has changed their classroom. And they were just like so enthusiastic about how the kids were more excited in the classroom. They were told a like personal story anecdote about like a kid who had almost started his own business so far. And he's like, so that was amazing.
Right, using Mid-Journey to
Yeah.
design,
Yeah.
sell them on T-shirts and plush toys. Yeah. Keith, what about you?
I think that my biggest takeaway is that we just have to keep building, keep pushing. I think that I kind of spoiled my closing statement with this, my earlier callback to the multilingual translation abilities. I think the fact that the second order effects of actually training these models is that we've created a multilingual assistant that allows people that previously could not communicate to communicate in the context of an AI tool meant to do something else is crazy. And to me, it shows exactly what this conference was for, which was that everybody just needs to implement these tools and continue to build and continue to do so safely. And the more we do that, we could find second order effects that could change the world, which is freaking amazing in my mind.
And I don't think overblown.
And I know that that's not the best reason to pursue something, but I think the first order effects could change a lot of lives as well. And I think seeing a community come around that is not just esoteric tech people like ourselves really made me feel so hopeful about what the city and state is capable of with AI going forward. I just could not be more excited to be here and building with you guys, and can't wait to see what we are all able to produce in the state for the next couple of years.
Yeah, likewise. Ryan, any closing thoughts for you? What's kind of your takeaway or call to action?
I think probably maybe not a wrap of the conference, but on this just finishing a thought on the education front is I think that there's potential here to engage with students that just really quite literally might not have had a voice. You know, I through being exposed to my wife's work as a school psych, you know, I've seen kids all across the autism spectrum, various physical and mental needs, and I think, and also linguistic ones, like you're talking about working in different districts, because Colorado's really diverse in that respect. And I think we're going to see a real like fragmentation in learning, in being able to support students who have very different ways of thinking, and that could be really exciting. I think right now we're still in the lesson plan phase, but once we leave this, you know, safe land into, you know, respecting who each individual kid is and sort of celebrating, you know, frankly, kids who were looked down upon for a long time and look at as just like a place we had to sink money, to no longer have to like come at them from that perspective, I think is going to totally change how like education gets looked at. And that's, I think, you know, getting to the earlier point of like, you know, we ain't seen nothing yet. I think that's one of the, in education, I think that's probably the single like biggest area of how like it won't like, it's not just a scaling of, you know, things in the past.
Yep. Yeah, it's a rethink. Well, Ryan, well, yeah, I think for me, I'm so motivated just to make more things, like thank to Keith's point. So, you know, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We're hoping you're a regular, because like we could talk to you for hours, man.
Yep. Yeah, we
talk to me for hours too, man. I haven't heard anyone else that's read the book Citizenville. So I was like,
well, we'll put it in the show notes for our listeners.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Awesome.
Hey. Oi. Hey. Oi. Hey. Oi. DIY. Hey. Oi. DIY. Hey.